Hey everyone, Todd Barr, Chief Marketing Officer of GitLab, and this is a marketing group conversation. So we will go directly into questions.
So the first question is mine, and it's in reference to the conversation we had the other day. I think we've come a long, long way in our plan module, and fantastic job for engineering and product for doing awesome work there. And I think we're to the point where we're 60, 70% of the way there to replace things like Rally and version 1 and Trello and some of the other things in the marketplace, Agile Craft. And so, Jim Riley, yes, that I am talking about the PMO, the Project Management Office, specifically more for IT, not for constructing buildings and stuff. Although technically, I suppose you could use it for that. Not really good, but and we're actually not to the point where we can do cost analysis, if then, and do resource allocation and people planning on it, and neither are the other tools that I mentioned. And so I think we're at a very solid state. We have awesome metrics behind it. If you haven't seen a current version of the demo, please go watch it. It's fantastic. And so my question to Todd in marketing after all of that is, are we planning to market that directly to the PMO now? As I look out to the future, and your question is, what we build for FY22 in slide 7, can we start doing that now? Are we start doing that now? Because by the time we get to FY22 in the middle of next year, our plan module will be fantastic and even better. So that's the question.
Well, thanks for the question. Thanks for the discussion on that a few days ago. I have spoken with Dunk about it. I'm not sure if Dunk's on this call or not. But Dunk was, as you know, at Broadcom and understands the Rally business pretty well, and agreed with you, which is that PMOs don't really have anywhere to go. Like Agile experts don't really have anywhere to land right now from a tooling perspective, and that GitLab could potentially fill that need. I think the questions we have to answer are, we've been talking about focusing our land and expand our land back a little bit to CI and SCM in particular, and making sure that we land there and then grow. So we have to decide, okay, is this one that, and what level of investment do we make in that? Is this something where it's great, we are going to put some content together and have some inbound, or is this something that we're going to run a campaign against, and those kind of things. So I've put this on Dunk's plate to go figure out if this is a persona that we want to go after, working with Ashish in strategic marketing for sure.
And so just to follow up, as I kind of talked about in our conversation too, I think it is good for land and expand both. And so I think it'll help us land new opportunities and a net new department within companies as well. So in my opinion anyway, having come from that same space as Dunk, I think it will get us into more opportunities. But again, that's just my kind of gut reaction to it.
Cool. Thanks for the feedback. And Dunk and Ashish will report back on that to you. Jim.
Yeah, my question number 2 has been answered, just clarifying where visible is. So I'll go to my question number 3. On slide number 7, you start talking about tactics for FY22. And I wonder if we're getting any kind of data thus far on the impact of virtual events, Todd, versus in person. So yesterday, the PubSec team had a event with Federal Computer Week. It was supposed to be in person. It pivoted to virtual. And as we think about spends, I think that's going to be important to understand what is a field we can advocate for, understanding that better.
Yeah, cool. So the linear attribution model and dashboard will ultimately give us the answer to that, which is, we'll have a Salesforce campaign, and then we'll get pipeline attribution and ultimately close one attribution from it. Like you said, it's a little early. I have been doing some analysis, and it looks like we sort of have this slope of pipeline that happens with our events and other things, where most of the pipeline we harvest, and I'm specifically more talking about field marketing type events, like inbound's running every single quarter. So we're just harvesting. But when we run, an outbound activity, we get, call it 40–50% of the pipeline attribution in the first, 6 months. And then after that, there's still more. So we're trying to figure out what that slope looks like. So I'll be able to say, yeah, we should have a pretty good understanding of how effective that is after 180 days or something like that. We'll kind of come up with that model. But what I'm hearing anecdotally is that we're getting great response and at a cheaper price. So like when you sponsor an event on site, you not only have the sponsorship cost, but you have all the costs to travel there and to man the booth and to design the booth and all these kind of things. Virtual events so far have been cheaper to sponsor and, way cheaper to actually execute on the event. And so I think that we're going to see really good outcomes. I don't know if Leslie, if you have any other kind of early returns on virtual events versus in-person events, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think you hit it on the head. And we also talked about it a little bit yesterday. It's too soon to actually tell, but to Todd's point on us tracking visible attribution touch points, all of that's tracking. So I'd be interested to look at the data in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Jim. Surely we will have other questions. And I won't call you Shirley anymore. Dad jokes, man. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Todd. It's David Fisher on the Excel team. I was curious. I was looking at slide 8, and I see outbound demand generation. I was trying to look in the handbook, but there's not a clear definition of what that means. Can you explain what tactics or what involves outbound demand generation?
Yeah, good question. And we have a relatively newly formed CMO staff, so there will be handbook changes coming relative to some of our definitions that we've realized aren't very well defined. And also in that FY 21-22 strategy refresh, there's some new definitions that we're going to add, like a PQL, for example, that we've never had before. But to answer your question directly, outbound are actions we're taking to go outbound to try to get people to interact with us. So when I talk about outbound demand gen, specifically in this case, it's not, so field marketing is sort of an outbound arm. They do a lot of outbound. So but in this case, I'm specifically talking about our outbound digital that we do. So we run digital programs, paid search, paid display, content syndication, a variety of things. Outbound email marketing, and going outbound to market things like webinars. Most of that is handled by our campaigns team, which is Jackie's team in Dunk's organization. And so when I talk about outbound, it's taking those outbound actions to try to get inquiries and MQLs. And so most of the attribution that you saw on slide 8 is coming from our outbound campaigns. And that's a growing percentage of our linear attribution from pipeline, which is a good sign, because ultimately inbound is super important to us, and the cheapest, probably best ROI it will always be, because it's, people coming to us because we are doing content and we're, people are searching for us. But we have to be able to understand and get to industry standard or better ROI on outbound demand gen to fill any gaps that we need, because we're a high growth company. So, we need 6 million more of pipeline than that we got. We needed that pipeline. And so we need our outbound demand gen programs to work and to get better and more efficient. So that's when you see outbound demand gen, that's what that means. We also have a kind of historic messy few problem here, which is that the SDR team used to be called demand gen team here. And so we're trying to fix that. SDR, sales development, and demand gen is these outbound kind of demand generation tactics that we're doing on Dunk's team.
Thank you. Also, follow-up question: just what is industry standard right now for kind of that space?
For ROI?
Yeah.
Again, I would let Dunk talk about that. I think ROI would be somewhere in like a good ROI in marketing. And when I define ROI, it's going to be essentially gross profit. So it's not just IACV closed one, but it would be IACV minus our cost of sales, which I think our gross profit is what, 80+%. So it would be like gross profit from a marketing program would be 5x your spend. That would be sort of a benchmark-ish thing.
Okay.
We'd be trying to go for. We are not that efficient yet, although we are way more efficient than that on inbound, I'm pretty sure. But overall, you know, that's probably where we'd be trying to get. But that's a little bit of that is in the eye of the beholder too, because if you take an LTV CAC view of the world, you might be okay to spend more than that to acquire a customer because our net retention is 150%. So you may be okay to have a lower ROI in a business like ours that's a subscription business where our customers grow over time. So that's just kind of a industry term or industry data point for you. It also depends on the tactic. Like Google AdWords should be way higher than that. But something like a field marketing event, you may not get that high of an ROI, but you're building a lot of pipeline and it might take a while for that ROI to fully come in.
This is Ashish. I have the next question, kind of a tee-up, because I hear a lot about this and maybe it's worth discussing. So, you know, we see GitHub and Microsoft as our main competitor at this moment. And Sid, you know, also talked about, and we included a video on how, like, we are pleased that, you know, we are leading and GitHub is starting to follow some of our, you know, strategy, etc. But from a marketing point of view, like, what are we seeing against GitHub, Microsoft? You know, what's our kind of plan for that competitor? So this is a question I get pretty often. I thought I'd put it here so you know, we can address it a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll start. Is Mahesh on?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll start and just say that as of our last eGroup meeting, I'm now the executive sponsor for our GitHub competitive motions. And what that means is we're going to take a more specific strategy on making sure that we are ready to compete against Microsoft and also measure a very simple metric, which is head-to-head wins versus Microsoft/GitHub. And so Mahesh is trying to figure out how we measure that appropriately. And our plan right now, like in general, we believe we currently have the product to win. And so we're trying to track those wins and losses and try to figure out exactly why we're losing. I think ultimately right now we're losing, we see because of larger account control of Microsoft being in there talking about Azure and bundling GitHub with Azure and those types of things. But so the way to begin to counter that is by our alliances and working with Google and Amazon and HashiCorp and potentially Atlassian and others around making sure that we're, have a solution that can compete more broadly than just GitLab versus GitHub, because that's where I think we're seeing Microsoft exert some of their overall account muscle. Mahesh, do you want to add the other things that we're doing right now?
Yeah, I think, just a couple of points. There is a lot more information available on GitHub and their recent changes or moves on the product space. Despite all that, our product and support and overall ROI is far superior to them. Certainly take a look at the resources in about gitlab.com/compete. And as Todd pointed out, what we want to do is sort of broaden the lens a little bit when we are thinking about competitive strategy, and it's market in, who are the other players in the market that are in this market, and then how do the customers actually consume their products too, right? Like sort of look at the entire value chain in this space, and how can we leverage that entire value chain to then, be in a very competitively better position compared to GitHub, rather than looking at it just as a one-on-one battle, and just on the basis of product, which we win. But I think where we have some issues is really when they bring in Microsoft ELAs and such, then it becomes a bit more of a challenge for us. And there are other ways to counter it. And we'll put something out there working with Todd pretty soon.
John.
Hey, Todd, I just had a question. When we adjusted our IACV target for this year, how did that impact the pipeline coverage goals? I know we kind of aim to have a certain amount of pipeline to cover like our IACV goals for a specific quarter. Do we expect to need like a higher ratio of pipeline coverage in this environment than we had previously been aiming for, or are we going with the same ratio?
Well, the ratio is already being tweaked. So in the handbook, it says 2-to-1 at the start of a quarter. McBride has been pushing that closer to 2.2-to-1 at the start of a quarter. I think if you ask our sales friends on here, they would much rather have 3, 4, 5, or 6-to-1 at the start of a quarter. But the reality is, I don't think it's about pipeline coverage as much, although I'd say certainly COVID has affected our ASPs. So, yes, it would be probably better right now to have higher coverage because of ASPs. Although, we'll see how Q2 shapes up ultimately from an ASP perspective. But one of the things that we have adjusted our marketing metrics relative to the new plan, but not sort of all of them. And so what I'm saying is our pipeline targets, for example, our SDR targets haven't really changed. Our pipeline targets haven't really changed. So we're still aiming for the higher numbers in marketing, to be honest. The only change is that we had to take some money out of the budget over the last 3 weeks. So when doing that, we brought some of those targets down. But because a lot of our linear attribution comes from inbound, the targets didn't come down as far as the budget we took out. So the best way to say that is we spend a lot of money on the stuff above inbound. We do spend money on inbound and we're increasing that investment. That's largely a people investment. And we now have Danielle running an inbound organization that's much larger than it was, a year ago. But at the same time, most of our discretionary spend is on sort of the top of those MQLs, meaning we get a lot of inbound and then we have to get more to hit our targets. We have to pay for that more with discretionary. And so when we take out money from up there, the number of MQLs sort of goes down, but not as fast. It's not like we're, even though it's a large percentage of the budget, it's a smaller percentage of MQLs that goes down. So all I'm saying is we're still shooting at pretty high targets. And our hope is that we fill up the pipe and they have better pipeline coverage now for Q3 and Q4, and we start building into next year for our growth to really come back. And currently the sales team is at 2.2 for next quarter already. So, and that's held about steady for the last few weeks. I expect that to start going, I hope that starts going up because I think we had sort of a COVID blip a little bit and some stuff pushed out, but I think that will start building up again. So right now we're already at a 2.2 coverage for next quarter. I think we'd all like to see a little bit more than that, but we're at least hitting where we're supposed to be. We'll see where that lands at the start of the quarter again. But looking decent right now.
Thanks, Todd.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great day.